Come in, come in. And she took me by the hands. The year was 1981. It was Christmas Eve, and for that particular service in his particular church, Tom Haig was invited to write a story, a Christmas story, for his congregation that he would read on that night in 1981. So Tom Haig wrote that familiar book, a familiar one to all of us, A Cup of Christmas Tea. A story. A Christmas story, but much more than a Christmas story. It's a story of a visitation. It's a story of a visit that a nephew paid to his aunt. And she upon his arrival exclaimed, "Come in, come in." And she took him by the hands. And there, right before his very eyes, he sees his aunt who's growing old and feeble, she who just had a stroke that year. She who now needed to use a crutch. Why, he was able to comment in the story of A Cup of Christmas Tea in that visit how even though her body had become old and it would become feeble, he wrote in that familiar story, in that visitation, that she was still able to keep Christmas within. Come in. Come in. And she took him by the hands. I envision the same type of story, the same type of experience that Mary and Elizabeth had in today's gospel story. On this, the fourth Sunday of Advent, we have another story, another Christmas story, another story about a visit that Mary pays to her cousin Elizabeth. Luke doesn't tell us how long the two of them have been separated, how long it's been since the two of them have seen one another. Luke doesn't even tell us what Mary's greeting was when she entered the house of Elizabeth. But the only thing that Luke tells us is that there's joy. Why, there's so much joy that there's a lot of leaping going around. Why, John is so excited as he is being formed in his mother's womb that when he hears the greeting, he leaps for joy. You see, we forget that this story of the visitation of Mary and Elizabeth involved four people. Mary, Elizabeth, John, who would soon be the one who would be the herald in the desert, and of course, Jesus himself, who is residing and being formed in Mary's womb. The visitation story is incredible. Why, I'm sure they couldn't wait to sit down because both of them, both Mary and Elizabeth, had a story to tell. It was an incredible story. For both of them, their story was amazing. For both of them, unbelievable. Why, for both of them, the story might seem to the other far-fetched. It might even seem impossible. Imagine the joy on Mary's face as Elizabeth is trying to tell her that she, who is advanced in years, who is thought to never be able to have a child, all of a sudden was pregnant. And she was about to give birth. And then imagine Mary's story telling Elizabeth, I'm expecting a child, and why, it was conceived by myself and the Holy Spirit. Imagine the amazement. Imagine the two of these women, each with their own son, gathered at the table, telling the story. Luke again doesn't tell us what the conversation was about. Luke doesn't tell us what Mary's greeting was, although it's believed that, of course, Mary, being the good Jewish woman that she was, it was Jewish tradition that any time you entered a house, the greeting was a simple word. It was one word: peace. Peace is how the visitation began. Peace is the word that the prophet Micah defines as to who Jesus Christ will be. He shall be peace. So was that what John the Baptist was so excited about? So excited that he was able to leap in his mother Elizabeth's womb? Was it simply over the greeting of peace? Does that greeting excite you and I as well? Certainly it should be, again, as we experience the world as we know it that we're living in today, and as we hear again over and over again of all the fears that are out there, the need for, of course, to put up our defenses because we just don't know when the next turn of violence will happen. Could it be that on this fourth Sunday of Advent, you and I, as we partake in this visitation, as we reflect upon our own story, as we think about how God is being formed anew in our life, as we think about how the incarnation, that first incarnation, was entrusted to these two incredible women, as we think about it all, could it be peace that might enable you and I to leap once again, to leap for joy, to leap with a sense of renewed hope, to be able to leap once again with the understanding that we no longer need to live in fear if we indeed truly allow ourselves, like Mary and Elizabeth did, to be open to the impossible, to be open to the far-fetched, to be open to the amazing, to be open to the life-giving word that is among us. And as Mary and Elizabeth help us to understand today this life-giving word that is within us, so that as you and I go to our homes, as you and I celebrate Christmas, as you and I go into each other's homes to be able to celebrate with family members and friends, that you and I, like Mary and Elizabeth, might then bring to those encounters our story, and in bringing our story, that we might bring peace, that we might bring Christ, that we might bring his transforming and abiding presence that is within us into those gatherings, into those encounters, into those moments where we gather with the familiar, with family and friends. And of course, the danger when we gather with family and friends is we're convinced we already know the story. We know these people, we've been around them all the time. But perhaps this Christmas, as we enter into these days leading up to it, and as we celebrate the great feast itself, maybe just for this one time, we might open ourselves as Mary and Elizabeth did. That we might be open to the surprise, that we might be open to the unexpected encounters, that we might be open to the story that is not being told with words, but is being told by the presence of another who is silently but lovingly inviting you and I to come into their life. And as we do so, and as they take us by the hand, and as we take them by the hand, why, this amazing encounter will be transforming as it was for Mary and Elizabeth, and we shall discover anew Emmanuel, God with us, God among us, God within us. And we, why then we shall leap for joy.